New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee. I'm Charles Purcell. This is The Log. Well, of course, the big snowstorm in the east. And those of us here in Wisconsin, when we hear about that, we just have to chuckle a little bit. Especially how the national corporate news media thinks that nobody has ever seen snow like this before. They become even more myopic than usual. Oh, there's snow. Now, in this case, I'm going to cut them a little slack because it really was pretty extreme. I mean, when you get 3 feet of snow, yeah, you deserve some headlines. I'll give it to you. But they do tend to get a bit self-absorbed, even more than usual. And I have to scold myself a little bit here. I mean, there are some serious issues. It becomes dangerous. The power outages, horrible. Hundreds of thousands of people without electricity, power lines down on the street. So, yeah, dangerous. So good luck to everybody out there. Now, the major corporate news media has kind of forgotten about DHS and ICE and the whole deportation story for the most part. But of course we haven't. I'm sure you haven't. ICE shot and killed a 23-year-old U.S. citizen in Texas. That happened almost a year ago, but we're just now finding out about it. Ruben Ray Martinez was killed on South Padre Island during what was publicly described as an officer-involved shooting. But only after a Freedom of Information request reviewed by Newsweek did internal ICE records reveal that a Homeland Security investigation agent fired the shots. The report says Martinez and his passenger were U.S. citizens. So somehow they buried this story, and we're finding out about it only a year later. Now, the official story from a DHS statement said that Martinez intentionally ran over an agent and that another agent fired defensive shots. So a very familiar story, right? And then we learned that the passenger in the car, the only witness, Joshua Orta, age 25, had planned to formally sign a statement that directly contradicted the DHS report. He was ready to assist with further inquiries into the incident. But just this past weekend, he was killed in a car accident. According to Orta, the two were driving cautiously through traffic when local and state officers approached their car. He said Martinez never struck anyone, never accelerated dangerously, never posed a threat. Quote, the trooper seemed to be trying to get in front of the car, like he wasn't moving out of the way when we tried to turn around and leave, like the police officer told us to. That's Joshua Orta, the only eyewitness, other than the agents, in a sworn statement given to lawyers representing Martinez's family. He goes on to say in that statement that following the shooting, law enforcement pulled Ruben from the car while he was clearly unconscious or already dead. Despite this, they put him face down on the pavement and handcuffed him. At least 10 minutes passed before any of them tried CPR or other treatment on Ruben. Martinez's family has been denied access to records of the man's death. The agents did not have their body cameras activated. Ruben was unarmed, nonviolent, not fleeing, and not resisting at the time he was shot. His killing was unjustified and excessive. That's Orta's written statement. The update from Minnesota, according to the reports I'm seeing, no sign of withdrawal, except that they've spread out to the suburbs. But as far as numbers, no. The number of vehicles in and out of Whipple Detention Center every day, the same. They're just getting stealthier about it. They're disguising their vehicles as commercial vehicles, exterminators, utility workers. There have been reports of ICE vehicles disguised as protesters with ICE painted on them or displaying pride flags. Agents are routinely photographing protesters and observers, using facial recognition to identify them. There have been a couple of cases where observers have been photographed and then the ICE agents literally led them to their house to intimidate them. They've shown up on the doorsteps of other observers and protesters. They still, to this day, deny having a database. There are observers 24/7 outside of the Whipple Detention Center because detainees are being released in the middle of the night in frigid sub-zero weather sometimes with nothing but the clothes on their backs. The Whipple Detention Center is out in the middle of nowhere with no neighboring businesses or no transportation. So these observers are ready to literally save people. There's an entire underground railroad that you've probably read about. Services for people afraid to leave their homes, still as active as ever. I want to thank Jonathan Last of The Bulwark for reporting much of what I just told you. Jess Craven of Substack is reporting on so-called blue butterfly zones in the Dilley, Texas concentration camp. And these are isolated rooms exclusively for teenage girls. The press, members of Congress, no access. The press can't get in, members of Congress can't get in. What the hell? We're still waiting to learn the fate of LaQuay Cordia, who was detained almost a year ago, March 13th, 2025, for overstaying an F-1 visa. So rather than deal with her case, they've jailed her for almost a year because she's a Palestinian woman and she had the gall to exercise her right of free speech in this country because she protested on behalf of human rights for Palestinians, that they shouldn't be the victims of a genocide. So for all intents and purposes, LaQuay Cordia is a political prisoner. There's really no two ways about it. So it's bad enough that they're detaining people based on accents, on skin color, just to hit their quotas, that 3,000 a day as demanded by Stephen Miller. But add now on top of that, political prisoners, imprisoned for a year for her political opinions. So this is not law and order. This is not defending the border. This is straight up tyranny. People are being beaten, jailed, and killed by the Orange regime's secret police. And we're talking about the price of eggs and tax rates. It just kills me how we still talk about policy. How debates in Congress don't sound that much different than they did a year ago, 2 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Yeah, of course, the decorum is gone. Everybody's gotten a lot meaner and polarized. The pundits, the talking heads, the columnists, the analysts still debate policy. The panel shows still have a Republican strategist on one side and a Democratic strategist on the other side. They talk about elections and strategies and which issues will resonate with the American people. How is this still happening when we have this massive criminal enterprise that has taken over the federal government? Why is that not the only thing we're talking about? Stephen Miller and Russell Vogt have a stranglehold on the nation. The oligarchs, the techno-fascists, the petro-fascists, getting everything they want in exchange for bribes to the Republicans in Congress to lay over and play dead. Their payoff, I guess, I'm not quite sure. Just the fact they get to hold on to their titles. They don't actually have any power, so it can't be about power. It's about, what, prestige, title, wealth, to cash in on public office? Democrats, at least some of them, talk a good game, but they too have their safe seats, the privilege, the center of the meat, cushions on the seat, houses on the street where it's sunny, summers at the sea, winters warm and free. All of this, and we get the rest. Apologies to Stephen Schwartz, composer of Godspell. Did you recognize that? Yeah, I don't know how we're falling for this. To even entertain the conversation about policies, about issues. There's only one issue. Save the nation from the grip of dictators and criminals. Yeah, this is nuts. Why are we talking about policy? It's like if the house is on fire and the firemen come in and argue about the furniture arrangement. They bust down the door, hoses at the ready, but they stop to debate if the couch wouldn't look better in the other corner. What are we doing? Late last week, South Korea, the Seoul Central District Court sentenced former President Yoon Suk Yeol to life imprisonment after finding him guilty of abuse of authority and masterminding an insurrection. Back in December of 2024, Yoon declared martial law and ordered troops to surround the legislature. The court found that the intention was to paralyze the assembly for a considerable period. Yeah, that sound familiar? Now, South Korea is a democracy. Yoon is likely to appeal the decision, but he will remain behind bars while he does so. The ruling also convicted other senior officials, including a former prime minister. Yeah, it can be done, and it must be done. Or, on the other hand, in North Korea, congratulations to Kim Jong-un, who was re-elected to the top post of the ruling Workers' Party. The delegates of the party praise him for bolstering the country's nuclear arsenal and strengthening its regional standing. State media reported on Monday. Yeah, we could go that way, too. On a spectrum with South Korea on one end and North Korea on the other end, where would you put the United States right now on that graph? Where would you plot our point between North Korea and South Korea currently? In the UK, Peter Mandelson, the former British ambassador to the US, arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office because of his dealings with Jeffrey Epstein. Just a week after, the former Prince Andrew arrested on the same charges. And yet not a single glove laid on a single American, including Howard Nutlick, U.S. Secretary of Commerce, and especially the orange meat puppet, with page after page of credible allegations. So what are we doing? What are we doing? Interviewing these people, listening to these people, debating with them. All right, we got to talk about Tuesday night, State of the Union. I've said in the past that the whole thing just needs to be shelved. American presidents haven't always done a State of the Union. I forget how long. I think we went almost 100 years without one. All the Constitution says is that the president has to, from time to time, report to Congress on the State of the Union. That can be an email. And this weird, absurd show that it's become, they jumped the shark. And if they hadn't before, certainly this week they did. I really hope you didn't see it. Nobody needs to go through that. I tried. It was grotesque. It was a grotesque display of lies and bombast. And we all know, we've known forever, that the congressional Republicans are sickening sycophants. And that was certainly on display at levels, to borrow a phrase, that we never thought we'd see. So what I did, I followed my own advice when I asked you please to not watch. I watched the two competing events. The People's State of the Union that happened out in the mall, and the State of the Swamp, or whatever they called it. That was an indoor event. So there were two alternatives, and I flipped between those two. And then went back later, tried to watch the actual State of the Union just because I knew I was going to be talking to you. I thought I should have something to say for you. So just out of a sheer sense of duty. And even then, I really couldn't. I had to fast forward often. It was just too hard to watch. The oldest story around here is how low can he go and how often can we be surprised? And that story just continues. Because as low as this guy goes, he's always able to go lower. He just lied and he lied and he lied the most brazen, obvious lies. The sky's not blue, the grass is not green kind of lies. The ego, the narcissism was on full display. The rudeness, callousness, and something maybe a little bit new. I've never quite seen him take such pleasure before in describing heinous acts of violence. You know how they like to lie about how all immigrants are murderers and rapists, and then they find isolated examples to make their racist point. And he's done this before, but he reached a new low as far as his lengthy, detailed, gruesome descriptions of murder victims and rape victims, telling their stories and describing their pain and the event itself with almost a thinly veiled glee. It was really nauseating. I heard one commentator call it violence porn. I thought, that's what it was. That was new. God, I really hope you didn't see this. It was awful. So I prepared my personal list of issues, policies that I wanted to hear throughout the course of the evening, either from the Orange Menace himself, and especially from the myriad of speeches coming from the two alternate events. And as you might guess, from the Democrats, I heard, they know how to say the right things quite often. But they always couch it in terms of non-commitment, in vagaries. And it's easy to be critical of the regime. Of course, that's the lowest of all the low-hanging fruit. So from my list, in no particular order here, immigration. Through the course of the night, I heard just everything you'd expect and nothing useful. Just the obvious atrocities that we all see from the regime. Heard about those. Nobody had any solutions, particularly. Climate crisis got a mention from the Democrats. Barely. Same for housing, education. I don't think I heard a single word all night about artificial intelligence. It's supposed to be this big existential problem. I don't remember hearing one word about it. Like I said, I was switching back and forth between the two alternatives, so I may have missed something, but I didn't hear anything. I didn't hear anything about big food, big ag. Nothing except the usual bromides about healthcare. Nothing really about public health from anybody all night. Affordability? Nothing but the usual cliches. Until Representative Summer Lee came on to give the Working Families Party response, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. Never heard anyone mention living wage. Reform of social media. It's ruining an entire generation. Countries all around the globe are passing legislation limiting social media. It's debated here, and nothing all night. I didn't hear anything. See, this is the thing about the State of the Union, and why I used to always look forward to it. It was the one night of the year. It's sort of the Christmas of politics. Let's all do a big reset. Let's establish our priorities. Let's make it clear who we are, what we're doing, what we want to do. There's a reason that political nerds used to love State of the Union night. But this was just a huge disappointment. Except for Summer Lee. I'm saving the best for last. She was actually fantastic. So I'll make sure to have some time to talk about that before we go. Government reform, election reform, nothing, of course, except the MAGA SAVE Act, which is an abomination. You and I will have to talk about that soon. I don't think it has much chance or any chance of passing. I guess that's why we haven't really talked about it. But here in the next few episodes, we should talk about the SAVE Act a little bit. Justice for the Epstein survivors from the Democrats, talking points. I'm sure they're sincere about it. I don't know, I guess. But no action plan. Tax fairness? Nothing really. Accountability for all the crimes of the regime? Yeah, Democrats touched on that, but I don't trust them. If and when they get power again, they're going to say, oh, let's not look backward. Let's look forward. I would bet on that. Real accountability? Nuremberg-type trials? People behind bars? People like Pete Hegseth, Kristi Noem, Greg Bovino, the Orange Menace himself? Yeah, the Democrats are going to chicken out. They're not going to go for it. I wanted to hear somebody call foreign policy what it is, a series of war crimes, neo-colonialism, complete with gunboats and missiles. Yeah. Lots of strong, impassioned words about LGBTQ rights from the Dems. Not bad. Again, words. I'm not sure what they're going to do. I don't think they're sure what they're going to do. And then on the 4-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, trying to remember if I heard anybody utter a word in support of the people of Ukraine, who as a nation we have entirely abandoned, except to profit off the war. The current regime hasn't given Ukraine a dime, just the opposite. They sell armaments to Europe, and Europe provides to Ukraine, and we pocket the profit. That's who we are now. So, State of the Union night was a huge disappointment, except for Summer Lee. And I'm going to continue to tease that because first I have to talk a little bit about Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger, who gave the official Democratic response, and it was exactly what you'd expect. I don't know why these genius political strategists can't figure this out. The State of the Union response is always an optics disaster. It's never good, and this one wasn't any better. They put her in a room with, I don't know, sounded like maybe 100 people, not sitting in front of her, but sitting on her right and on her left. And it just looked odd. So she stood in between the two banks of audience members, nothing behind her, and only the camera in front of her, which she looked directly into. So she didn't address the people in the room, she addressed the camera. There were a few applause breaks that sounded forced. It didn't work. It was weird. If you're going to have people in a room, get a big room at least and fill it up and talk to them. So that's just on the style. The style was just typically bad. And the content of her speech was, they're bad, followed by we're good, followed by another they're bad paragraph. And then there was a paragraph about how we're good and they're bad. And then a little bit more about how they're bad. But then she ended with Americans are great. It was nothing you couldn't write yourself. I often mention this little measuring stick I have. Up in Minneapolis years ago, when I was working with the Dudley Riggs Theater, and we did improv, there was a bit that all improv troupes do where you play interviewer and expert. One person plays the interviewer, one person plays an expert. You get suggestions from the audience, and you go. So ever since then, when I hear an actual expert talking on a subject, I judge them on how much better they are than what I could do on an improv stage. You, me, a million different people could have improvised Abigail Spanberger's speech. They're bad, we're good, talking point A, talking point B. But Americans sure are strong and resilient. And we come through in the end. Good Lord Almighty. And that on top of the optics of the room. You know what, Democrats? Maybe for next year's State of the Union response, why don't you put Bernie in a goddamn stadium? Fill it up with 80,000 people and let him go. Come on. But of course, Democrats would never do that because, God forbid, the progressives have a voice. No, you got to give it to the most milquetoast, moderate, centrist Democrat you can find. And this year, it was the Right Honorable Governor Abigail Spanberger. But speaking of progressives, I saved the best to last. Summer Lee. Getting it done. Summer Lee is the U.S. Representative for Pennsylvania's 12th District. She's in her second term, age 38, and an honest-to-goodness, living, breathing progressive. It was just her in a room with a camera, with an ASL interpreter in a box in the corner, and she was brilliant. If you haven't seen it, do yourself a favor. You're going to feel better about the world when you see Summer Lee's State of the Union response on behalf of the Working Families Party. She used bold language, words that the moderates are afraid to use: authoritarian, gaslighting, crisis, Palestine, diversity, union busting, oligarchs, billionaires. She made a point of saying that this is not a normal time. There's nothing normal about this. And that means we cannot fall back on politics as usual. This woman was talking straight to my heart. The State of the Union is dire, she said. She called the Orange Menace's State of the Union an obituary. Phew. She talked about workers and actually had the nerve to use the word workers, not middle class. No, workers. Words that have meaning, have bite. Workers. Struggle. She was more specific. She gave more examples. She was more passionate. Talked about the concentration of wealth, the direct contrast between working families and corporate CEOs. She called for bold policy proposals. She reminded us that you cannot reform hatred. She used profits like it was a dirty word, because it is. Called on America to fund education. We got all the money we need for war, she said. Talked about economic justice. Talked about Medicare for all. The only time I heard that all night long. A national jobs program, paid family leave, free or subsidized childcare. She told us without apology that social services create healthy people, a healthy economy, a healthy democracy, and we can afford it. She talked about mutual aid. She talked about defunding ICE. Again, the only time I heard that all night long from anybody. She looked us right in the eye and said the Democratic Party is at a crossroads. We can choose bold action, or we can choose the corporate donors. And watered down bills, her words. Abolish super PACs. We can't serve two masters, workers and billionaires. Her words. Nobody came close to Summer Lee. This was exactly what I'd been wishing for, and she came through. She didn't call for patient incrementalism. No, she called for a movement. She accused the Democrats, rightly, of not meeting their words with action. She talked about grassroots organizing. She talked about money out of politics. She reminded us that working people are the majority. And yes, working people. That sounds so Marxist. Summer Lee's State of the Union response was a gazillion times better. You can't even put him in the same conversation as Abigail Spanberger. Because this is what the voters want. I've never in my life seen a wider gap between a political party and its base. It is way past time for the Democrats to get on board. To use a tired old phrase, lead or get out of the way. And as you and I have talked about before, if they want to jump in front of the parade and pretend they're leading this thing, I don't care. Fine. Stroke your own ego. But at least get into the right parade. So that was State of the Union night. And there was only one winner. Only one. Summer Lee and the Progressives. They knocked it out of the park. Nobody else came close. And the regime just sunk to brand new lows, even long after we think that's not possible. All right, thanks for listening. Find this and all episodes at the website, charlesburcell.com, or on your favorite podcast platform, or on our flagship radio station, WXRW in Milwaukee, riverwestradio.com. Find us on Substack and Blue Sky. Peter Donalds wrote and performed our theme song. By the way, remember to check out our new weekend show, We the People, Songs of Freedom, Justice, and Solidarity, a music program curated and hosted by my alter ego. Drops on Saturday mornings. All right, there it is. I love you. We'll see you out there.